right, good morning, everybody. Welcome. My name is Nate Hultman. I'm a professor in the School of Public Policy and also the facilitator of the Global Sustainability Initiative here at the University of Maryland, which I'll tell you about in a minute. We're excited to welcome you to this kickoff forum on building collaborative approaches to climate policy, and we really appreciate and thank you for your time to be here. Before we begin, I would like to give a few housekeeping announcements. The restrooms are located down the hall and to the left. We will have a break following the first panel with snacks, and a reception with food will follow the group discussion with full hors d'oeuvres. We are here as part of our interest here at the university, but also I think a shared interest in the full community here in rethinking and expanding the ways that we at the university and universities as a whole can better integrate with our communities to support decision makers and other stakeholders as they wrestle with tough societal challenges on energy, climate, sustainability, and more. Universities are neutral conveners in a way that other stakeholders around the community may not be. We have the ability to take our resources, our research, our desire to expand knowledge, and help share that with our states, our cities, localities, our countries, and global community with the intention of sparking more informed and more sound action on some of these societal challenges. Here at the University of Maryland, we, as a research university, hope to bring our expertise, resources, and experience to help bring stakeholders to the table, inform discussions that follow, and develop meaningful policies out of that. Part of our commitment to translating this research and policy knowledge into action is realized in our involvement with the recently established University Climate Change Coalition as the research lead. By mobilizing local and regional stakeholders and arming them with tools and data, the work of UC3 has the potential to accelerate needed action. Each of these coalition members, each of these universities, is convening a cross-sector forum just like this one, or somewhat like this one, they're all different, to gather insights across different areas of expertise, different communities, business leaders, elected officials, and other key voices. And then with the idea that this will actually then inform a process subsequently that helps refine and improve what the concept can be and how we actually do this process. Today you are part of our University of Maryland's first forum as what we call a pre-summit to next week's Global Climate Action Summit in San Francisco, which many of you, I'm sure, have heard about. We're convening as part of our UC3 engagement, and our experience here will provide input, as I said, to future such convenings, both here at the University of Maryland, but also at other universities as this expands across the country. This theory of change will be reflected in a few short days at the summit in San Francisco, where we at the university will join states, cities, businesses, county leaders, nonprofits, faith groups, investors, and of course, universities from around the world. Today's outcomes will be presented as part of a UC3 all-day forum with the We Are Still In Coalition, which many of you might have heard of, which represents over 3,000 network members that have shown a commitment or made a commitment to reducing emissions or otherwise advancing climate action consistent with the goals of the Paris Agreement. Okay, we would also like to thank the UMD's campus-wide Global Sustainability Initiative and the various deans and entities here on campus who sponsor that for convening and sponsoring this event. GSI focuses on short-term steps we can take here at the University of Maryland toward long-term sustainability goals by way of cross-campus collaboration and through our 6 unique working groups. Today's forum reflects both GSI and UC3's shared vision of bringing a diverse set of voices to the table and that connecting the right dots can create a lasting impact. I would also like to shout out thanks to our organizers, Shannon Kennedy and Theo Carruthers, who have really lifted this entire workshop. They might even be outside. They're organizing, as well as the rest of the team at the Center for Global Sustainability, who has also thrown in and pitched in to help this happen. I want to introduce and thank our clearing facilitators, Jonathan, Dan, Jay, and Greg, who you'll hear more from throughout the day, and they're here to help us with this conversation, knowing that I'm not the expert on how to facilitate, so they're the experts and they'll help us with that. To introduce our keynote speaker, which is the next event, I would like to actually welcome Rosina Bierbaum to the podium. Rosina is a research professor here at the university and Roy F. Weston Chair in Natural Economics at the School of Public Policy. She served on President Obama's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, chairs the Scientific and Advisory Panel of the Global Environment Facility, and was lead author of the U.S. National Climate Assessment. She's also formerly Dean of Michigan's School of Natural Resources and Environment, and formerly director of OSTP's Environment Division. Not least because of her extensive experience facilitating positive change with diverse stakeholders, we are very excited to have Rosina here and part of this conversation. So please join me in welcoming Rosina.
Thank you very much, Nate. I would say that Shannon. We introduced you, but you were organizing outside. So good morning, everyone. When we were trying to think about who should be our keynote speaker, we had really three criteria. One, that it would be someone who had worked really long and hard in local and regional stakeholder building, collaboration on climate change. Two, someone who's a great communicator and translator of complex information for the lay public. And three, a great leader. And so that's what led us to Mike Tidwell, and we're very excited to have him here today. He is the founder and director of the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, which is a grassroots nonprofit organization dedicated to raising awareness about the impacts and the solutions associated with climate change in Maryland, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. He's also an author and a filmmaker, and he predicted in vivid detail the Katrina catastrophe in a book he wrote back in 2003 called Bayou Farewell, The Rich Life and Tragic Death of Louisiana's Cajun Coast. And his more recent book, which focuses on climate change, is titled The Ravaging Tide, Strange Weather, Future Katrinas, and the Race to Save America's Coastal Cities. Then he has a documentary film, We Are All Smith Islanders, which vividly depicts the dangers of global warming closer to home, here off the coast of Maryland and Virginia. And Smith Island is very close to Tangier Island, which has been in the news quite a bit, and both are suffering the ravages of sea level rise and warming oceans. Mike was also a founding member of the Greater Washington Interfaith Power and Light, which is a very interesting national movement that covers 40 states. It's led by Jews, Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, etc., and they do everything from conducting energy audits of houses of worship to education and outreach on climate change and the environment. And I could go on and on, but Mike urged me not to, but he has been featured in many media outlets, including TV, radio, and of course the press. He received the Audubon Naturalist Society's prestigious Conservation Award and an honorary Doctorate of Letters from Nicholls State University. So without further ado, I want us to welcome this leader, this author, this screenwriter, and this climate change educator, Mike Tidwell.
Thank you so much. It's really, really good to be here on the great campus of the University of Maryland. I want to thank you all for inviting me to come. And I want to thank Shannon, especially for organizing this, and my friend Carol Warner, who I understand had a role in getting me here, and all of you here at the Global Sustainability Initiative. My son is a Terp. He's a senior studying what else? Environmental policy. And so it's especially great to be here. I've probably spoken on this campus in one way or another 20 times over the last decade or so, you know, on panels and forums from everything from land use to climate resilience to clean energy and more. And I know these are all subjects very dear to your hearts here at the Global Sustainability Initiative. So I'm glad to be here and to help celebrate the role that you all play at universities as natural and neutral conveners for thoughtful debate, speech, and public learning. I honestly, in my role as a climate activist across this region in Maryland, Virginia, and DC, I don't know where we would be without universities, without the visionary faculty, the resources that universities can bring, the space for real debate, the legitimacy and credibility of the science and the advocacy. I see it every day in my world, and so that makes it a special pleasure to be here. You know, so I like coming to the campus and speaking. I'm not sure the students enjoy it so much. In 2007, I think it was, the wise leaders here at the University of Maryland required all the freshmen to read my book, Ravaging Tide, as a freshman read. And what I remember from that year is that there was a student who had a very popular Facebook page called How Mike Tidwell Ruined My Freshman Year. So maybe I'm doing something right if I ruined their freshman year. So I've been asked to just talk briefly about my years of experience in grassroots climate action and coalition building. And I'll just begin by saying that one of my early mentors, when I come from a freelance print journalism career, where I wrote for lots of magazines and newspapers. And in the late 90s, I started writing a lot for the Washington Post on the issue of climate change. And then I realized that we knew enough about climate change in the late 90s and early 2000s. We had the data. What we didn't have was the organizing and the movement building. My first mentor really was, for those of you who live in Maryland, our state senator, Chris Van Hollen, who at the time in 2002, right as I was forming CCAN, he was running for Congress. And as a volunteer with the Sierra Club, they asked me to do a profile of Chris Van Hollen in the Sierra Club newsletter. And I really used this as an opportunity to ask Chris Van Hollen, how do you do it? Because he had spent, by that time, I think 12 years in the Maryland General Assembly, most decorated environmental legislator in the history of the state, did so much to save the Bay. And I asked Chris, how do you do it? How do you make change happen? I mean, we're a nation of laws, and if we want to change this nation, ultimately we have to change the laws. Whatever it is we want to have happen in this country in a sustainable, permanent way, at some point there has to be the sound of a wooden gavel against wood, followed by the ayes have it. So I asked Chris Van Hollen, legislator, how do you do it? How do you make change happen? And he said, it's simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. There are just 2 steps. Step number 1, according to Chris Van Hollen, was build the biggest coalition you possibly can for your issue. Leave nobody out. Involve everyone of all races, all creeds, all religions, all demographics. Reach out to everybody you can, whatever that issue is. If it's a campus issue or a statewide issue, leave no one out. So that's first step, build the biggest coalition you possibly can. Step 2, according to Chris Van Hollen, my first mentor in the work I do now, is never, ever, 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 ever give up. Build the biggest coalition you can, never, ever give up. And so that is what I tried to apply and have been applying for the last 16 years in my work at CCAN. Now, how do we, in the world of climate change, in a world of rapid global warming, what are the 2 major ways that we have to make change happen? And there are 2 main categories. The first, of course, is we have to keep fossil fuels in the ground. Scientists tell us that, you know, the first rule of holes is when you find yourself in one, stop digging. We need to keep at least 80% of the world's known reserves of oil, coal, and natural gas. Those that are known, not even counting the ones that haven't been discovered yet, but the known reserves in the ground. And at the same time that we're keeping those fossil fuels in the ground, we have to switch as fast as we can to renewable carbon-free energy. Keep it in the ground movement. I was honored in the spring of 2011, my good friend Bill McKibben called me up and he said, Mike, tar sands pipeline, Keystone XL, it's about to happen. We have to stop it. Will you join me, Mike, in getting arrested outside the White House to make a point that we need to stop KXL? And Bill asked me, do you think we could get 1,000 people arrested at the White House? And I said, Bill, I don't know, but we could get 2 because I'll get arrested with you. I was really, really proud to be part of 1,252 people over 2 weeks who got arrested outside the White House. And by the end of those 2 weeks, we had put Keystone on the political map of this country. And everyone knew what it was. They knew what tar sands was all about. We had 2 goals in that first action against Keystone in the late August, early September of 2001. Number 1, our goal was to stop the pipeline, which to this date has not been built. Fingers crossed. And the second goal of that movement was to normalize a creative, assertive campaign to keep fossil fuels in the ground, to normalize and draw attention to the fact that we have to fight the pipelines, fight the compressor stations, fight the coal export facilities. And we could check the box on that because today, I mean, there is not a single proposed major fossil fuel project anywhere in the world that's not being opposed by somebody. Pipelines in Virginia, in Maryland, compressor stations in Charles County. I mean, 10 years ago, before the Keystone movement, none of us even heard about this. It was just rubber stamped by the Public Service Commission. What are those construction workers doing? A pipeline over there? Whatever, right? Now we know and we fight. So keep it in the ground movement. The Keystone fight was again, a really good example of that. Build the biggest coalition you possibly can and never give up. From First Nations all the way to environmental groups. And the fight still goes on. Actually, later today, I am going to Bath County, Virginia, to an encampment on the property of Bill and Lynn Limpert, who own about 40 acres of land in Bath County, Virginia, where Dominion Energy wants to build a frack gas pipeline from the fracking fields of West Virginia, 600 miles, probably ending up at the coast of South Carolina to export frack gas from the Marcellus Shale to the rest of the world. And this is a piece I wrote in Sunday's Washington Post about Bill and Lynn Limpert. They have the most pristine old-growth forest in all of Virginia on their property. They're part of this incredible old-growth forest. It's like a museum of great works of art. There's a Picasso of hickory trees and the Rembrandt of sugar maples. Just an amazing place. And Dominion wants to cut all those trees down to make room for the pipeline. And then the ridge that they're on, which locals call Miracle Ridge because it's so amazing, so beautiful, 300, 400, 500-year-old trees, cut those trees down and then lower the ridge itself by the height of a 3-story building to flatten it enough to then put a pipeline on it for a clean natural gas pipeline. It's just amazing. And these are the fights that we are still fighting all across this region in the effort to keep fossil fuels in the ground. And then, of course, in Maryland, we banned fracking. It was an amazing thing. It's inspired countries around the world. Scotland banned fracking recently, and they used Maryland as their source of inspiration. New York State has done it. Took us 7 years to do it. It was intense. We had to get everyone on board, farmers in Western Maryland, environmental justice folks in downtown Baltimore. I will say that, speaking of faith leaders, on March 17th of 2017, the year we finally banned fracking, there were a couple of dozen faith leaders who got arrested outside the State House peacefully. I was invited because I'm a Sunday school teacher at my Presbyterian church and a founder of Interfaith Power and Light around here. We got arrested on March 17th. The very next day, we got our 29th senator to agree to vote for this bill. In the Maryland General Assembly, you have to have a supermajority to override a governor's veto. The governor had signaled he would probably veto a fracking ban. We got our 29th senator the very next day after 24 of us got arrested outside the State House. Our 29th senator said he would vote for it. We had a supermajority. We could override the governor's veto. Later that same afternoon, on March 18th, Larry Hogan convened a hastily arranged press conference to say that he too suddenly had realized that fracking was too dangerous to allow to have happen, and he looked forward to signing the fracking ban bill. And that's, again, biggest coalition you can. Don't give up. Took us 7 years to get that bill passed. So that's defense, right? That's keep it in the ground. I want to talk about offense, because we got to not just keep fossil fuels in the ground, we need to switch to renewable energy as fast as we can, the substitutes for the dirty fossil fuels. And I will tell you that when you're building coalitions, when you're collaborating, it is easier to get people to oppose something than to support something. Solutions on a big scale are very, very hard to build that coalition, to get that sense of urgency and that right level of just anger and to get people to really put their shoulder into solutions. It just is. It's the way the world works. You know, if someone's trying to build a highway through your neighborhood, it's easy to get people to oppose it. When you're trying to get people to support an energy efficiency bill that will tweak the Public Service Commission's regs on, boilers, harder. But I will say that my proudest moment on the offense side, the switch to renewable side, was the Offshore Wind Act of 2013 in Maryland, which is a really big bill. I will say that my group, Chesapeake Climate Action Network in Maryland, in 2004, we passed the first mandatory clean electricity standard. 2006, we passed the Healthy Air Act, which forced utilities to spend billions of dollars in Maryland cleaning up coal-fired power plants. It is literally literally saved thousands of lives, and increased our air quality, and joined Maryland to the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. We passed a Clean Cars Bill in 2007, Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act 2009, the Empower Maryland Bill, which is an energy efficiency bill, in 2017. But the bill I'm most proud of is offshore wind bill, because that's the one our grandkids and great-grandkids are going to remember. It started in 2010 after the Gulf oil spill. We saw what dirty offshore energy looks like. At the same time, the University of Delaware that same spring had issued a report saying that there is an incredible untapped resource of offshore wind between Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. If you look at a map of the United States, there on the East Coast, there's this big indention. Geographers call it a bight, B-I-G-H-T. It's like a continental-sized bay. It's called the Mid-Atlantic Bight, from between Cape Cod and Cape Hatteras. It is the perfect place in the entire world to build offshore wind farms. It is shallow, it is windy, and it is near where 150 million people recharge their iPhones every night. And this vision was put out there by the University of Delaware at the same time that the Gulf oil spill was going on. I remember meeting with my good friend Stuart Clark, who's the head of the Town Creek Foundation, and saying to him, we've got to change the definition of what real offshore energy is. We need to push for an offshore wind bill in Maryland. And this is our teachable moment. While the oil is leaking in the Gulf, now is our time to talk about offshore wind. We started a campaign in the summer of 2010. That campaign went on for 3.5 years. Talk about building the biggest coalition ever. I've never been part of a coalition this big. By the time we were done, you know, we had commercial fishermen on board, we had the United Steelworkers, we had the Legislative Black Caucus. It was just amazing, but it took us 3.5 years of nearly constant fighting and advocating to get it done. And I will tell you that if you've ever been part of a big legislative fight, if you've ever tried to pass a really big bill that really matters, basically everything that can go wrong will go wrong. It is a slugfest, and it's something that you have to just really, really stick in there. In 2010, the summer of 2010, Brad Hebner, who was the head of Environment Maryland at the time, he and I went all over the state, spoke in every church basement, every school cafeteria we could to educate people about offshore wind. We worked to get then Governor Martin O'Malley on board. He was hesitant at first, took us a good 6 months of cajoling to get him on board. We got him on board. He introduced the bill in 2011. The utilities hated it. You're going to tell us we're going to have to buy all this offshore wind? We just really would prefer to keep burning coal and gas, thank you. Our coalition wasn't big enough to beat the utilities that first year. We had to come back the next year. We had to change the policy a little bit. That second year, 2012, we actually got it through the House of Delegates. But we had a personal feud between two senators and a key committee in the Senate that kept it from getting out of the Senate. We had to come back and actually in the spring of 2012, when we knew we weren't going to win in the 90-day Maryland General Assembly in April of 2012, there were 2 students from the University of Maryland, 2 students from St. Mary's who blocked entrance to the State House front door, and were just an amazing scene where these students themselves resisted arrest, were engaged in peaceful civil disobedience, and it was an inspiration. It really, really put the issue of offshore wind on the map. And then we came back in 2013, and then at the last minute, the Legislative Black Caucus decided they weren't going to support the bill because there wasn't enough equity built into it. And Kathy Pugh, who's now the mayor of Baltimore, was in the Senate at the time, and she says, you will build equity into it, and this is what needs to happen. And she pointed to the NFL, the National Football League, which has something called the Rooney Rule, where if you're going to hire a head coach, you must interview qualified minority candidates before you make a final selection. She said the wind companies who want to build wind farms off our coast have to show us that they have or have attempted to hire qualified minority candidates, women, African Americans, and veterans. And we built this into the bill, and it has worked. And now we have 2 offshore wind farms that are going to be coming. We hope they're going to start construction in 2018. And I think that once people see them off the coast, we're going to have more to come. What I will tell you about the offshore wind bill of 2013, under this heading of collaborating and building coalitions, does someone need to get in? Is that in Maryland, when a bill is signed into the law, the governor sits at a table with the president of the Senate and the Speaker of the House in something called the Governor's Reception Room, this famous building built in the 1700s with chandeliers and the rest. And everybody stands, everybody who's worked on the bill stands behind the governor. It's a ghost. Everybody stands behind the governor and the Speaker and the president and has their photograph taken. Well, for this bill, we needed 3 photographs. There were so many people who had worked on the bill that it took us 3 photographs to get all the advocates. And old timers in Annapolis said they had never seen a governor's bill signing that took 3 photographs. And that was the offshore wind bill of 2013. So looking ahead, what do we need to do? We need to switch to 100% clean electricity as soon as we can. And I want to tell you guys I came prepared with some propaganda. It's called the Maryland Clean Energy Jobs Act. There's more information on the table over here. We're going to pass this bill in 2019. I hope that you'll help us. It's going to move us to 50% renewable energy by 2030, but it's going to create a pathway to get to 100% soon after that. If you're interested in being involved in Chesapeake Climate Action Network, have blue cards right here, literature right here. I will also say that if you live in the Maryland suburbs and Pepco is your service provider, we are trying to crowdsource a solar farm, the first crowdsourced solar farm in this region, where if we can get 900 families, we're going to have a solar farm built in Prince George's County on top of an old landfill that will power our homes, lower our price for electricity. It'll be cheaper than the regular Pepco price, and it's just an amazing thing. And I hope that you'll get some literature on that. But we have to have 100% renewable electricity, and then we have to electrify everything. I mean, that's the future. Electrify everything. All electric cars, all electric space heating. Use electricity for everything from offshore wind, from local solar, and the rest. And the last thing I will say to you is that keep fighting. You guys are in this movement. You're leading this movement. You're just quality voices in this movement. You inspire people like me. Bring more of your friends along. Bring your church members. Tell everyone you can. And I just heard on the radio this great Israeli historian, Yuval Harari, who, it's just a really great quote. I was listening to a podcast. He has a new book out. And his quote was, "If the future of humanity is decided in your absence because you are understandably too busy feeding and clothing your kids, you and they will not be exempt from the consequences. This is unfair, but who said history was ever fair?" The reality is everyone is counting on us to solve this climate crisis, whether they know it or not. They are counting on us. Let's bring them into this movement. Let's grow our movement. We've got to stay involved in this fight. We've got to make time for it. We've got to build and join those big, beautiful coalitions, and we have to never, ever give up. Thank you very much.
We're just going to take a couple questions if you guys have any questions. Don't go all at once.
Mike, when we had you here in 2007 as part of the first year book, we were asking, when you were here in 2007 and as part of the first year book, we also had Peter Franchot in the room, the comptroller. And the idea was, what do we need to be doing to green the pension funds for the state, the university, and others, so that we're not investing in the fossil fuel industry, but supporting the new wave of clean energy that needs to go forward into the future? Is that a possibility? I know New York has led the effort now on that.
Yeah, and back to Bill McKibben, I mean, Bill has really inspired people all over the country to talk about divestment, to get universities and state and public pension funds to divest. It's been a tough fight. I mean, it's been hard. I'm happy to say I was part of the effort to get the District of Columbia to divest their worker pension fund. I've been less successful trying to get my own county of Montgomery County here in Maryland to divest, but we're still working on it. At the state level, I'm not aware that we're making progress, but I do agree with you that the New York example is huge. I mean, that's tens of billions of dollars in New York, and it's just going to change markets. So, you know, a lot of people say divestment. You know, you want to stop investing your money in ExxonMobil. We really think one person or even one county or even one university is going to bring ExxonMobil to their knees? You can't bankrupt ExxonMobil with divestment. And our answer is, yeah, you're probably right. We can't bankrupt them, but we can bankrupt their reputation, which is what we need to do. We have to weaken them in the public square of public opinion, and that is happening more and more, and we have to keep going.
What are your feelings on changing the way we engage in real estate development and policies related to real estate development?
There was just a report, I think the Union of Concerned Scientists just came out demonstrating that real estate prices and values are already going down. It's not a hypothetical, maybe kind of sort of in the future. Real estate values are down across the East Coast by about 7% because of the fear of climate change and sea level rise and observed sea level rise. There are apartment buildings being built in Miami as we speak and New York City, which are flooding as they're being built. I mean, imagine taking on a 30-year mortgage in Miami right now, or New Orleans, or parts of New York. 30-year mortgage, okay? So we're talking 2048 with the kind of sea level rise we're seeing. It's just astounding, and that realization is starting to catch up. Look, this is not an easy issue. We've waited so long to deal with this problem. My organization is regional, so we're very active in Virginia, and the Hampton Roads region of Virginia, coastal Virginia, is like a basket case. It's worse than New Orleans in terms of low-lying areas prone to flooding and largest naval base in the world. You're seeing basically a retreat. You know, the city of Norfolk has basically said this whole area of the city is going to be permanently underwater no matter what we do within 50 years. And we have to start having a managed retreat. There will be no encouragement, no new development here. So that's already happening. There are streets in Norfolk, regular neighborhood, suburban looking streets with sidewalks and nice houses, perfectly dry, and they will have signs that say no wake zone because they flood so often that there's a sign that says no wake zone as if they're in some kind of ship channel. And this is in dry neighborhoods because they, they flood a lot. So it's a real problem. And we need to, one, slow down the sea level rise through all the reasons we've talked about. And two, we do have to talk about managed retreat. And it's going to be difficult. And I think the falling real estate prices are going to accelerate that. You know, my fear is that there's going to be a panic, bubble, and we'll do a chaotic, unmanaged retreat. That's what Katrina was. I mean, so many people in South Louisiana did not go back. But it was a chaotic, unplanned retreat. We need to do it in a planned way, in a fair way, in a just way, and there's just a lot of work ahead.
Thank you.
Join me in thanking Mike Sippel for his
Actually, I want to ask one more question, Mike,
Sure.
before you sit down, because I want to transition to our next panel with this question. So first of all, thank you, and
Sure.
so appreciate your commitment to the issues and sort of taking your perspective to the cause. We're at a university here, and one of the themes of today is sort of how we can connect better across these different stakeholder groups. You have a lot of experience connecting coalitions and stakeholder groups, and you gave us some advice based on your experience. But as you look at our role here at the University of Maryland specifically, or other people who are in the research community more broadly, what are the kind of golden opportunities that you see over the next couple of years, not only just kind of broadly theoretically, but also sort of specific areas that you think might be ripe for better collaboration?
Well, it's a great question. I will say, as someone who advocates constantly, spends a lot of time in state houses and city halls across this region, universities are so respected. When university scientists and advocates and policy voices show up, people listen. It doesn't happen enough, though. Don Bosch, who's the head of University of Maryland, what is it, UMCS?
Environmental science.
Yeah.
Actually, it's a correction. He's not the president of the University of Maryland. He's been retired for.
Right.
He's been out as a professor.
He's emeritus.
No, he's a faculty member in the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science.
Got it.
For this
Great. He's been very, very active on the advocacy front. He serves with me on the Governor's Commission on Climate Change. I would just say more involvement on the policy level, the policy debate, the hearings. I don't find it controversial. I don't think anyone in either party finds it controversial when most university people show up and speak to the data and speak to the policy. So I would just say be more visible, try to be more engaged at the legislative level is what I would recommend. And students, you know, encourage your students. Encourage your students to be involved. Nobody can say no to a young student who's passionate, no matter where that person comes down. And I will tell you, you all know, of course, that the president of the Maryland Senate is Mike Miller. There's no bigger Terps fan. There's no bigger Terps 24/7 guy. I've literally been in meetings in his office over really, really important issues, and he's watching the basketball game on his phone like this, you know. So I would say take advantage of that.
Thank you. Anyway, thanks again, Mike. That was really great and inspirational, and it's again part of the purpose of being here today with different people from different communities is to have these sort of cross communications. So very much appreciate it. I would note, by the way, we did do a report out of University of Maryland on pension risk or climate risk in the pension system. So talk to us afterwards if you're interested in seeing that. It got a little bit of traction in the state legislature. It started out as a bill that was going to be forcing the pension system to recognize climate risk and take it into account. It got watered down to all other kinds of risks. So the climate element ended up getting dropped, sadly, but we made some progress, but I'll take Mike's advice and we won't give up on that. All right. Okay, so our next event is an expert panel, which will be moderated by Dan Neese, who's a senior research associate here at the University of Maryland in the Center for Global Sustainability. I'd like to invite the three panelists and Dan to come up, and I'll give just a brief introduction as you're walking up. So Ellen Williams, distinguished professor in the physics department, Lou Ziska from USDA, and Mark Conway. And then Dan will also come up and moderate the panel. So you'll have a chance to explain your involvement in the world of policy and stakeholder engagement on this. So I'm not going to go into great detail about that, but please, if you could join us up here in the front. Thank you.
I'm actually going to switch things up. I'm going to stand here, mostly because I took an allergy pill and I'm bouncing off the wall. So if I try to sit, that's not going to work. I don't know everybody who organized this, but I just want to thank you for allowing us to follow Mike Tidwell. That's like losing a bet. I've seen him speak several times now, so I knew what to expect coming in. So I almost didn't make it. I've been on this campus for 30 years, and I still don't know how to work my way around this building. But anyway, thank you, Mike. That was awesome. In May of this year, the state of Maryland convened a first annual State of the Coast conference. It was remarkable for several reasons. First was the popularity. They had anticipated 200 people. They had to expand within the first day of accepting registrations to 350 people. They turned another 200 people away. So it was a highly popular event. It dealt with some of what I would refer to as the traditional environmental issues in Maryland, specifically restoration and protection of the Chesapeake Bay, where I focused most of my career. But most of the conference dealt with climate change, mitigation, adaptation, and resilience in the state, specifically in coastal communities. And that was the reason for the popularity. Another remarkable part of the event was an event that preceded it, which was a one-day workshop focused on a new initiative that is being put together by the state itself called a Climate Academy. And it is meant to educate local and state public and private officials on the impacts of climate change and the actions that are going to be necessary to mitigate those impacts. And it was very well done, and the Academy will have its first cohort this fall. And the goal is to have thousands of people go through it. And obviously, we see a role for the university. But in my opinion, the most remarkable thing that happened at this event was in the plenary session on the first day. And there was a panel, much like the one we have here, that included the Secretary of Department of the Environment, the Secretary of Department of Natural Resources, the Director of the Maryland, D.C. chapter of the Nature Conservancy, and the Director of Climate Change Programs at USDA. And they allowed the audience to ask a few questions. And the very first question that came in was for the gentleman from USDA. And they asked him, how is it that you're able to work on climate change issues in an administration that won't allow you to use the term climate change? Now, I don't know if it's policy that the federal agencies are not allowed to use the word climate change, but the perception in this room was they're not allowed to use the term climate change. And he did his best to answer that question, recognizing that he had a mortgage to pay. And then Secretary Grumbles from the Department of Environment stepped in, as did Secretary Belton from DNR. And both of them said, we have never been told by our boss, Governor Hogan, to tell anything but the truth. And we operate every day under the assumption that we are here to tell the truth and to serve the citizens of the state. I was really struck by something you said, Mike, about how Governor Hogan came along just in time. And what we have learned through these types of events is we don't really care what motivates leaders to get to where they need to be. We just need to get them to where they need to be, which has probably defined my career, 20 years here at the university, working with local government. Just get them where they need to be. If you got to get them drunk first, get them drunk first. It doesn't matter. Just get them where they need to be. And so that, to me, was a remarkable event because it showed that Maryland is a very important place in our country right now. We have a very blue state with a red administration that's focusing on the issue of our species. And they are an indication of what's going to be necessary to move forward. And I would suggest that Nate's question to Mike at the end of his presentation was extremely important. What is our role at a university for allowing those leaders to make the decisions they need to make and get them to where they need to be? So that's what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to focus on really two areas. Actually, we could say three, but kind of massaging the first. The first is the role of what universities do as well as any other institution in the world, which is research and teach. Get these ideas, get the newest, latest thinking, technologies, policies into the minds of the people that we're teaching and then into the minds of the people who are leading. And so we're going to talk to a couple of people who are doing that. And then something that is near and dear to my heart with the university's role in then training and educating people to become those leaders and to move into the community and to start to engage. And so we're going to talk about all three of those things. I also want to thank the people who organized this for not making me read everybody's bio. I appreciate that. You guys have it. You know where to find it. So we're going to allow them to talk about what they do. The first question I have is for all three of you, and we're actually just going to work our way down without any suggestion of who I think is more important. We're just going to start at the end, and we're going to work your way towards me, who I actually do think is more important. So, and the first question is, what are, this is your chance to tell us what you're working on, but what do you see as the key issues that we are facing as it relates to climate change, both globally, but also more specifically in the state of Maryland, and then your role, your perceived role in engaging in the policy making and the decision making moving forward. Now I know I need to just tell everybody that really only one person on our panel works for the university, so we're going to have broad discussion about what that means. So we're going to have very different perspectives about what the university's role. But I just want to ask everybody the same question to be fair. So if you wouldn't mind leading us off. Louis, I'm sorry. Is that working?
All right.
I bet you everybody can hear you anyway, so.
I think you can. My name is Lou Ziska. I've been interested and been working research on climate change since I was a Smithsonian Fellow back in 1989. My focus is on looking at the links between climate change, rising CO2, and food security. And that covers, as you can imagine, a multitude of sins. So one of the issues that when I first started was trying to look at the effects of rising CO2 on plant biology. And I was gung-ho, man. I had just come out of grad school. I was full of myself, and I wanted to get that message across. And, you know, I would talk to people, and there was maybe 5–10% of the audience that would go, yeah, we got to do something. And 90% of the audience just fell asleep. And then I realized that one of the things that binds everyone is looking at your health. And so one of the things that I focus on today is looking at climate change, plant biology, and your health. What? No, plants don't have anything to do with health. Well, other than, you know, nutrition, and other than, you know, contact dermatitis, those of you that are familiar with poison ivy or know about that, other than your allergies, other than your medicine, other than all of those things, yeah, they do. And so when I started talking about people's health in the context of climate change and CO2, it was like, oh, you mean I could be affected? I could be hurt by this. Oh, I better pay attention. And suddenly it went from 10% to 90%, and people were interested in what I had to say on the subject. So what I'm looking on now in a very large context is what's happening to pollen seasons, what's happening to your allergies, what's happening to plant-based medicines, because 2 billion people in the world don't go to the corner Walgreens to get their prescription filled. What's happening to all of these issues? And how do we as a society, as a culture, as a global civilization respond to those? So the most recent stuff that I've been working on is looking at rice, because rice is consumed by 2 billion people. And the nutritional quality of rice is being impacted by the rise in CO2. So that's from a global perspective. One of the issues that I look at that's on sort of a regional focus is looking at how does this change in climate affect invasive species? How does it affect pests? Well, the folks at the CDC are looking at, well, what's happening to Lyme disease? Why is it moving northward into Canada? Where's malaria going to be? What's the Zika virus responding in terms of climate change? But I'm interested in terms of looking at snakeheads. I'm interested in terms of kudzu. I'm interested in terms of soybean rust. How are those things being impacted by climate change? So that is a much harder sell, because we go back to the how is it affecting me business. So in this instance, what I'm hoping for in the context of climate change is, I don't know, this is kind of science fiction, so stay with me. I'm hoping that there's some sort of, I don't know, handheld computer, something that you could hold in your hand that you could put data on, and you could take pictures with of new things, new organisms in the state of Maryland that have not been observed before. And I know, stay with me, that you might be able to share this information with others so that they could be aware of it, so that we could actually keep a database of how climate is in fact affecting these new organisms coming in that have pose a direct threat either to aquaculture in the Chesapeake or to soybean and corn farming. I know, and you could even, you know, with this handheld computer thing, you could even take pictures with it. I know, it's crazy, right? But nobody's taking an initiative. Nobody's picking up on that. And even more to the point, no one's doing it from the context of how do I then fit this into what's happening on the mid-Atlantic? How do I fit this into what's happening in the United States? How do I fit this into what's going on in Europe? So a typical example is we have the pine bark beetle moving from Canada, coming south, affecting the forests of Maryland and the Northeast. Who's keeping track of that? Well, the Canadians are, but they're not sharing their information with the United States, right? What's wrong with this picture? This is a global issue. And at the same time, it's a regional issue. So finding those aspects that are both regional and fit into the global perspective is incredibly important and so vital to any sort of long-term address of being able to adapt to these changes. So anyway, with that, I'll get off my hind legs and be quiet.
So I just have a clarifying question. So this is going back to Mike's response to Nate's question about the role of the university. And one of the first things you said was objective data, being able to provide information in a way that is not, and it sounds like you're science fiction. And by the way, my aptitude with technology, that sounded like science fiction to me. So, but it sounded like that was an organized way of providing information to decision makers on here's what's actually happening. Is that a fair description of what you said?
That's an absolutely fair assumption, and it's one of the things that I think makes it real to people. One of the best examples I can give you from the agricultural sense was a phone interview that we did for the Midwest, for Iowa farmers. And we called them up and we said, hey, are you investing in infrastructure because you're seeing this big change in rainfall? Oh yeah, we're putting in tile drains because we're getting flooded and we're getting rid of our excess water. Great. Are you seeing new pests and diseases you've never seen before? Oh yeah, we're seeing my farm down the street, you know, it's blah, blah, blah. Is this climate change? Oh no, that's Al Gore. So how do you get it relevant to the farmer? They understand that things are changing. But how do you come up with a concrete example that they can relate to, where it isn't esoteric, where it isn't political, that they can see what's happening right in front of them?
Thank you. And we would love for them to say, oh no, that's University of Maryland. So we're proud to take ownership of the issue. Dr. Williams, we're going to now move from the natural world and something that all of us get, which is our own health and our food system and things like that, to something I must admit, reading your website is something I totally don't understand. But maybe you could first explain what the difference between a professor and a distinguished professor. I thought all of my professors were pretty distinguished when I was in college, only because they were a lot smarter than me. But anyway, some description of what you do, and then quite honestly, this is something that, again, Mike touched on, providing an understanding of how very complex issues can be distilled down and discussed in a policy environment with people who are responsible for understanding myriad different issues and becoming experts on them. And anyway, I was fascinated by that reading through your page last night. So thank you for being here. And
okay, well, you're a brave man to read my webpage. So my name is Ellen Williams. I've been a faculty member at the University of Maryland for nearly 40 years. A distinguished university professor is a nominated appointment from among the full professors of the university, which a few professors are nominated to become distinguished every year. And I forgot to wear my little gold turtle, which I got when I became a distinguished university professor, but I love my little gold turtle. So I was a fundamental physics research person for most of my research career, but about 10 years ago, I was so concerned and so worried about issues of climate change and energy efficiency that I decided to make a change in my life. I left the university, I went out to work in the energy world and did a variety of different jobs, including working for an oil and gas company, and eventually wound up in the Obama administration running an agency called the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Energy, which has to do with energy innovation. And what I'll say, and then of course when the administration ended, I was out of a job. The university was nice enough to take me back, and they're now being nice enough to let me work at the interface of energy technology and policy rather than doing physics, which is what I used to do. So let me just talk about innovation and why it's important. We've heard about the urgency, how important it is, and how fast we have to move to address the issues of climate change. We have to reduce our CO2 emissions by 80% by the middle of the century. That is phenomenally hard. And to do that, we need advanced technologies like offshore wind. 10 years ago, offshore wind, anybody would have told you, too expensive. We'll never make it work. 1,000 energy innovations, technology innovations driven by policy have gone into driving down the cost and increasing the capability of offshore wind. There's not a single silver bullet that's going to solve our problems. We need 1,000 points of technology and 1,000 points of related policy to get those new technologies out there in place, ready to go to help us drive our emissions down and our efficiency up. And one of the nice things that we have written into law here at the University of Maryland is the Maryland Energy Innovation Institute, written into law to help university teams who are working on innovative new ideas and small companies take their ideas, get them developed to the point where they work, and help push them out into the commercial sector where they are going to have an impact. And if you'll bear with me, I can talk about technology examples from now until, as long as you'd like to listen to me talk, and a lot longer than that. But I'll just give you a couple of examples. We have in the MEI Squared a small fund where we support small companies and innovative university teams to develop new technologies. Some of those technologies involve energy storage. We know that both for electric vehicles and for the grid where we need to integrate renewables, we need to be able to store energy in the form of electricity, typically in the form of batteries. We have existing battery technologies which are getting better, but they're not getting better fast enough, and there's much, much better options out there in the future. We need to get those ready in place so that when we need them, they'll be there. And we have many incredible electrochemistry projects going on in MEI Squared to develop those new technologies. MEI Squared is supporting a really interesting project of agricultural waste management. This is something Ryan knows a lot about. People don't know, but ultimately a lot of our greenhouse gas emissions come from agricultural waste, and crop manure, degrading plants, and so on. As those things degrade, one of their emission products is methane, which is a really potent and negative greenhouse gas. And nitrous oxides, which is also, I'll come to that. So, and it turns out, in principle, you can capture biological waste, agricultural waste, and ferment it and capture the methane, but it's hard to make that economically viable. This team at University of Maryland, led by Stephanie Lansing, is developing a new technology that takes that waste, and in addition to capturing the methane, they're capturing the nitrogen products that are present because there's a lot of urine and manure there, awful things you don't want to talk about. They're capturing the nitrogen products in the form of ammonia. And that has the benefits of not allowing the nitrous oxides to go out in the atmosphere, but also creating a very valuable, high-cost, high-price product which they can sell and change the balance of the commercialization activity from something that you can't afford to do to something that you might be able to afford to do, and drive that into our system. And the secondary benefit of that is that these would be set up in rural communities, they would benefit rural communities, and now you're in a place where you're turning around public perceptions of groups of people who say, oh, that's Al Gore, to people who say, oh, here's this cool technology for clean energy, I'm all for it. And that transfer of public opinion is something we really need to do.
And I keep coming back to Mike, and I appreciate your comments. And so his point about stay engaged on the policy, be there, this is a totally different level of engagement for the university. One where there's a lot of precedent, especially in technology and engineering, and there's a role for the university in advancing not just technology, but the businesses and the industries that will support it. But this is taking it kind of a new level that there's a lot of discussion about collaborative governance and the different sectors working together. I'm not sure the university really understands the potential power that it has to move industries and to move not just the ideas of mitigating climate change, but the actual businesses and technologies that are going to make that happen.
Well, I'll just comment that the MEI Squared is tasked by the legislature to come forward with a report within about a year, and I'm going to be coming to many of you in this room for help in making that report to help drive these concepts forward into, one hopes, expanded legislation for more of this type of engagement.
That's great.
Yeah.
Lou,
Just very briefly, thank you. I'm down the road. I didn't even know about this. And this is one of the biggest challenges that we have, is that we're all in our own little silos. I'm sorry, I think the current administrative term is cylinders of excellence. But we're all in our little silos. And we need to stop that in the context of how we deal with climate change. We need to be aware of what other groups are doing and to work together to solve some of these issues. So thank you all for that. I really appreciate it.
I don't know where I'm going to use that first, but I'm going to use that somewhere. So in 1997, I was about a year and a half into my graduate program at the School of Public Policy and Environmental Policy. And I decided to do a joint program with get an MBA. I was at dinner with my parents, and my dad's like, why? And I said, because I want to get a job. And I was really concerned about getting a job, so I decided to get an MBA. Fast forward about a week and a half ago, I'm on a conference call in a car at a rest stop in New Jersey on the way back from vacation with my kids in New England. And I had the chance to virtually meet Mark, and he was describing the work that he does at the Baltimore Tree Trust. And I kind of spaced out about halfway of what you had to say, sorry, because I started thinking, crap, I didn't need that other degree. These guys are really doing real work. There's like real jobs out there for people who come out of the School of Public Policy with a degree in environmental policy. So I wasted all of that mental energy on an MBA. And the real kicker is I ended up staying at the university. I didn't go anywhere for 25 years. I stayed here and worked here. But I was really impressed with the work that Mark is doing in his community. Now, Baltimore, as you all know, if there were a flagship community in the state, it is Baltimore, Maryland, and for good or for ill. And often on a daily basis, it's both. And so engaging on an issue on natural resource issues in general in Baltimore is difficult. And there's some wonderful organizations there that do that, Blue Water Baltimore and Parks and People, and now Baltimore Tree Trust. It's a very difficult row to hoe, and it takes a very business-like approach to what is being done. And it was just, as somebody who's basically dedicated his life to this institution, it was very heartening to see that type of thinking coming out, not from just this university, but from the school where I graduated from and I now work. And so I guess I'm going to kind of change the question a little bit for you, Mark, because you have a different perspective than the other two panelists. But the role of the university in getting you ready to engage on these issues, and then the role of the university in enabling you, now that you're in the industry, to engage on these issues, and what you see as being finally most important to the citizens of Baltimore and the work that you do.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I didn't know you thought so highly of me.
I didn't either until I met you. So.
So my story is actually very interesting. It actually partially begins with this man over here, Mike Tidwell. So when Mike Tidwell wrote his book, Ravaging Tide, it was the first year book at Maryland. I read that book and got really, really interested. I was in the Facebook group. I was on the reading group. Got really, really interested.
Did he ruin your college career too?
Actually, I interned with him. He made my college career. So it's funny how things come full circle, and I end up here, have an opportunity to sit beside him. So yeah, my interest started in college and sort of worked its way up. And I think through my experience with the university, time and time again, I've had opportunities to learn and grow and build with different opportunities that were presented to me. So yeah, that's probably where I'd start. So I did undergrad here with a focus in government politics and philosophy. And then really found an interest in environmental policy, especially with some of the work that I did with Mike, at CCAN. And then went to get my master's in policy school with a focus in environmental policy, and was fortunate enough to take Professor Holtman's class. So it's funny to come back and see all you guys all at the same place, all at the same time. And during my time going through the policy program, I worked part-time at the EPA, working on the Bay program, looking at a cost-benefit analysis of cleaning up the Chesapeake Bay. And man, that really pulled me in, and that's part of the reason why I am now where I am with the Baltimore Tree Trust. Shortly after leaving the policy school and graduating, I began working in the mayor's office at the mayor's office of CityStat, and essentially helped to manage the city in many ways, using data and analysis and understanding processes and the issues that the city faced, and finding innovative ways to address those problems. And one of the first things I realized when I moved to Baltimore was a huge lack of trees. And through all my time through policy school, through all my time at the EPA, I really learned a lot about the impact of trees on communities, on the environment, on climate change, on stormwater, on health, on all different types of factors. And it was a no-brainer to me. I thought, I was like, I'd start a tree organization planting trees. Me and my friends would meet up on the weekends, drink beer, have pizza, plant trees. It was awesome.
How could that go wrong?
How could that go wrong? So started, asking around, how do I get this off the ground? Who can I talk to? Who can I learn from? And essentially everyone I spoke to recommended I do not do that. It's incredibly difficult to get an organization of that size off the ground. You need resources. You need trucks, trees, money,
and a lot of beer.
volunteers, a lot of beer, even more pizza. And so ultimately, I ended up connecting with the Baltimore Tree Trust, who was looking for an executive director at the time. And I was not at all expecting to make that step to a full-time position at the Tree Trust. But they offered to pay me to do something I would do for free, so this is awesome. But it was interesting because my experience at the city taught me a lot about how cities work, how cities run, and sort of the issues that sort of plague the city and where it keeps its focus. And so it's interesting sort of hearing each of the other panelists and sort of how they discuss their perspective with farmers and how farmers understand the issue but don't necessarily see it as their highest priority. I think often that is the case in urban areas as well, and I think to a degree in the city. And I think urban areas probably present some of the biggest supporters of climate change and maybe the energy to actually take steps in a direction to reduce energy usage, to find carbon storage options, and to advocate on that behalf. But I think the day-to-day of cities often leads us in a direction where we're fighting fires. We're worried about crime, we're worried about schools, we're worried about so many other different things. And I think oftentimes from a management perspective, mayors and leaders of different agencies in the city, and I think even sometimes to a degree at the state, are not necessarily looking at climate change as the biggest issue on their forefront. So I sort of see one of the ways we can sort of begin to address that, and from my perspective and my journey throughout, the last 10 or so years, is to find opportunities for us to implement things across cities that are no-brainers, win-wins, trees. Trees present a carbon storage opportunity. They improve the look and feel of neighborhoods. They reduce energy usage because they cool nearby buildings with shade. And thinking of ways to address climate change in that way, I think would be, in some ways, not so innovative, but in many ways innovative because it hasn't actually been implemented in a way where cities feel like they have an easy way of stepping up. So yeah, I think that has probably been one of the most important things that I've learned through my journey in ways that I feel like I'm engaged today. And as I think through ways that, in my new capacity as the executive director of the Baltimore Tree Trust, that we can continue to work in this endeavor and find new ways to advance carbon reduction, carbon storage, so on and so forth. Finding ways to finance our projects and ways that are beneficial towards reducing impacts of climate change, but then also improving communities, improving the look and feel of cities, reducing stormwater, so on and so forth. These are all things that cities want to do, all things that cities need to do, and certainly have an urgent prodding to do, but often don't have the funding to do, and finding ways to connect climate change to these issues, as opposed to often looking at them as separate, which in many ways they are not. Part of the reason why we have some of these stormwater issues are, of course, city planning and the number, the amount of trees we've taken down, the amount of green space we've removed, which leads to more energy usage and less carbon storage. City planning essentially has led to a lot of the increases in energy usage and transportation to get to work, so on and so forth. But I think trees present an opportunity to reduce carbon, and that's where we sit at the Baltimore Tree Trust and how we can help.
So I want to thank you. That was awesome, and I want to kind of build on that idea of let's pick something we know we can. Nobody's going to argue over trees. Though, by the way, I was one of the people that was watching you do your cost benefit of the Chesapeake Bay, and we didn't know who you were, but we had some words for you about what you were doing. But I wanted to. So, Mike, I've been relying on you the whole time, so I'm going to finish that way too. you mentioned that it's so much easier to get people motivated to stop something than to do something. But universities are the bastion of ideas, of what's possible, of moving. You know, this campus has tens of thousands of people on a daily basis who are thinking about what the future holds or what the future could hold, what we may be able to do if we are only motivated to do it. So it seems to me that there's a role for the university in enabling us to move beyond just stopping and actually getting action. Now, obviously, you've been able to do it in some very important ways, but we also heard some ways that's being done here. So start with the trees, and then we'll work our way down. Is there a role for the university in saying, in Baltimore, and I speak from experience, I have the scars of either, well, anyway, from working in Baltimore, it's a very difficult place to work because of all of the very complex issues that are going on. Try and get people to talk about, for example, resilience when the homicide rate is going up in the city. It's very difficult to do in making the connection. And the only way you can do that is to think of the future and a place where they would want to live. Is that the world you're living in, and what is the role of the university in helping you realize that vision?
I think, hello? I think Mike alluded to this earlier with regards to the traditional roles of universities and sort of expanding upon that. I think universities play an integral role in developing the leaders that will come out of universities, the students, and making sure that they're fully aware of ways that they can be engaged and can better inform the movement as they come out. I think that's incredibly important. I think from our perspective, I'm always looking for students to work with and students coming out of the university, out of the policy program that can work with us, better inform our processes so that we can have a large impact. When I look at other ways that the university can help, so the university does a ton of research, and you know, from a nonprofit's perspective and even from a city's perspective, oftentimes the city doesn't have the resources to do that sort of research nor the expertise, and from a university, cities rely very heavily on research that the city can provide, on best practices, on the expected outcomes of best practices, because from a city perspective, that next dollar is incredibly important in how you spend, and they want to make sure they're getting the best bang for the buck.
Right.
So when the city's deciding, like, we want to do the Red Line in Baltimore, or if we should hold off and instead, you know, see if Uber pans out, who knows? You know, understanding the different impacts on how that, you know, plays its role on roads or plays its role on the ability to get to work and how people actually use those systems. Research goes a really, really long way in informing policy decisions, and I think leaders really do look to, especially flagship institutions like University of Maryland, for a sense of what is the right direction to go on transportation, on food access, on schools, on trees and city planning. So I think that's incredibly important. I think that is also relevant from a perspective of nonprofits. So, you know, we're always looking for ways to better justify our work and the impact of our work. So, you know, when we're applying to grants and trying to explain to people why trees are important and how the different ways that trees impact the way people interact with the city and interact with the greater global environment, you know, sometimes that can be lost if it doesn't have the proper research and that person standing behind you telling you, yes, you know, trees are important because they reduce carbon. And in fact, they reduce carbon more in cities because there is more concentration of, you know, of greenhouse gases in cities.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, you know, there's more compacted carbon in city trees than there are in forest trees.
Right.
So, you know, all these considerations I think go a long way in universities thinking about how they play a role in, you know, in getting involved down the line. One of the very important things that, you know, I was able to engage in, part of my student activities was activism. You know, I was a little bit of an activist in college, and I think, you know, that led me down the path that I went now to continue to where I am now. So I think encouraging students to you know, speak up and to lobby and to make noise. This is really the opportunity to do it. You'll never have more time, I promise.
Yeah, right. Well, I don't know, you could, he's gonna retire eventually, somebody's gotta step in.
Mike's gonna retire eventually,
Right.
somebody's gonna replace him.
So, and actually, so the connection between science, research, and activism is exemplified probably more in climate change than just about any other issue that we've noticed and or that we've had in our society. So, Dr. Williams, this vision of what is possible, I think, is exemplified in energy. I mean, we have seen such amazing advances in energy technology. I know that about 10 years ago, there was huge debate over the fact that wind and solar would never achieve the efficiencies as fossil fuels. And a year and a half ago, I believe it tipped in many parts of the country. Both of those now compete very efficiently with fossil fuels. And so there's this, that energy really is kind of this indication of what the future may hold. Is that what you see? And how do we transfer that to the other parts of what's going to be necessary to solve this problem?
Yeah, so in the last 10 years, I've gone from a point of total fear and depression about the future of the world to one of great optimism, because I have seen these energy technologies develop, as you said, and their prices have come down, and they're working, and policy drivers and public opinion are really making a big difference. So I'm very optimistic. We have to constantly keep pushing, however, because in the energy field, any new technology is always coming up against an incumbent technology. Somebody is going to lose. And so this is always an uphill battle to make sure that the policies are in place to have the pull that we need for those new technologies so they can develop and can
Which
get
is
out
a
there.
lesson for other industries also. That's always going to be the
Yeah.
case.
Yes, absolutely.
And I guess the last word will be with you, Lou. I'm very interested in what so the data and your science fiction, and I really want to know how that works out, if that ever comes to fruition. How that you envision that changing the way policy is being made, both on climate change issues in general, but also on agricultural issues, specifically in the state of Maryland, and what you see needing to be done.
I think there's, one of the negatives, the most important negative from my perspective is the sort of idea that we are now in an era of alternative facts. And I think the way to combat that is to look at the university and the research agencies to come together, to not have these cylinders of excellence, that we can begin to work on commonalities, whether it's looking at food waste, which is a huge aspect of what we have to deal with, but to use that as a benefit, to convert that into something that is meaningful, both in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, but also in terms of economics. So I think the economic issue is one that is incredibly important, but also in the context of reality, that we look at climate change not as a Chinese hoax, but as something that is real, and particularly importantly, something that affects you personally, where you have a stake in it, you recognize the stake, and you're going to make a change as a result of that recognition. So that, excuse me for using the word, that lodestone of truth is going to be the university. It's going to be science. And to recognize that and to utilize it as a means going forward is important, particularly when it comes to changing the economics of the issue. So if you can look at this and say, hey, it isn't just this wild hippie tie-dye guy in the back who's arguing for this. It's the head of Exxon. It's the, you know, somebody who's, people that are recognized and well respected. I think that's the most important issue going forward. So there are a lot of opportunities there. There are opportunities in the context of the available resources that we have in the Chesapeake. There are opportunities in the context of other issues. And one of my pipe dreams is looking at coal, not as something to burn, but as something to add to the soil as a soil amendment that will improve marginal soils by adding carbon back to that soil and increasing the longevity and sustainability of that. So why can't we do that? Why can't we go to the coal CEOs and say, hey, your industry is on the verge of decline. maybe you should think about using coal as a resource for soils to improve soils and to improve farming. There are lots of these ideas. And one of the things I find is that at the university level, there are, 10,000 people that are going around thinking, hey, what if I did this? Hey, what if I did this? What about this idea? What about that concept? That's we talk about infrastructure in terms of concrete and steel and asphalt, but in reality, the infrastructure, the mental infrastructure, the idea infrastructure is exemplified by the university and by science in general. Let's get beyond that alternative facts stage and go back to basics and look at that as a resource that is being underutilized.
Well,
And
I think we would
sorry,
all-
I'll get off my soapbox.
We would all love to get beyond the alternative facts stage, and would suggest the universities are absolutely a mechanism for doing that. So the good news is we are only 4 minutes behind. The bad news is that means we're 4 minutes behind, so we don't really have any questions for very many people. But we will, so we're 4 minutes behind, which means we have like 20 minutes for questions. That was a joke for the people who organized this. We're not really going to do that. But we have a break coming up, and so if there are pressing questions for our panelists, you can ask them then. In the meantime, please thank them for me for being here today. I wake up every day pessimistic. I don't know if you all remember the former coach of the University of Maryland basketball team, Gary Williams. He was described as having an impending sense of doom that carried him through the good times. And I think today we got past that, and we can now all be a little bit more optimistic. So thank you all very much for being here. And again, if you have any questions for them, you can ask them offline. So thank you.
There will be snacks on the other side of this barrier where you have breakfast, and then we will hear from the parents. Well, sorry, we're just gonna do a quick briefing.
I just want to describe a little what's going to happen this afternoon.
Do you want to just go in the picture? We'll do one more minute of
Yeah.
space here.
Yeah, a couple minutes just to let you know what's happening from here. Good morning. My name is Jonathan Spector. I'm with the Clarion, and Shannon and Theo and folks asked us to come in today. I'm a Terp alum and lifelong Maryland resident. That's not the reason that I'm here, but always a great opportunity to be back on campus. And the work that we do is in coalition building, causing alignment, taking groups like this towards action, whether it's in public health, running opioid summits in DC, hugely complex, lots of stakeholder groups, homeland security related, regional resilience, Maryland, DC, Virginia. So very much familiar with working in environments where we've got lots of voices, lots of commitment, not one problem to solve, hugely socially complex. We heard a lot about some technical components, technical challenges that are out there in innovation, technology, and opportunities. This is around what do we do with all of this? How do we work together? And so we'll talk a little more about what you heard this morning as we go into the next session. But to let you know what we're going to do, we're going to take a little break. We're going to transition rooms. You'll see the rooms, as you saw earlier, are set up a little bit differently, where you're going to sit in specific topic areas. And the three, and we can talk about if these are still the right ones, but based on what we heard today, we heard areas around clean energy, around resilience, around land use. So you're going to find your area of passion, and you might have to just pick. And you don't only have to have one in your work and in your life, but for the topic, for the purpose of conversations, we're going to roughly divide somewhat equally into three groups. We're going to talk a little more about you heard the so what and some things that are happening. Let's get into the now what. What do we do? We're not going to solve any problems today. We're going to do more around framing and get a shared perspective of what are these topics? What did you hear? What are the opportunities that are available for us? So what I would encourage you as you go into the break and start to meet each other a little bit is what resonated with you today? What excited you about what you heard? What do you want to learn a little more about? What do you want to talk about a little bit more in smaller groups? What are those opportunities for GSI, for the entity that you represent? So we'll start off when we go into the room, you'll sit at tables, we'll talk as a group a little bit, and then we'll break down into conversations, and we'll give you some guiding questions, and then actually you're going to do some work and report back out to the larger group around what you talked about and some things that showed up in your group. So take a break, grab some food, and then we'll set up the room in the 3 different areas, and you'll pick your topic of whatever's moving you today, your primary area of passion for the conversation that we're going to have for the rest of the morning. Okay? All right.